The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. This is Eric Johnson from Aurora WDC, and welcome to our latest edition of the Advanced Strategy and Marketing webinar series. With me here on the phone is Alan Michaels from Industry Building Blocks. Alan, say hello.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending.
And also with us is Mr. James Andrews. He's the principal at the News Patterns Corporation, and Jim will be talking today with us about an idea that I think is really innovative and new. I hadn't heard of it before, which doesn't necessarily mean it's never existed, but I'm pretty attentive to these types of issues out there. So I think it's truly a novel concept around the industry graph. And Jim, without further ado, we'll turn it over to you. If you folks would please send in your questions in the questions pane, that would be very helpful. And Jim will address those questions in the second half of the hour. So Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. You can hear me correctly? I'm on okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Excellent, just checking. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is James Andrews. I am the technical founder and president of a company called News Patterns. We've been in business, in the intelligence business, for over 10 years. And our primary mission was, can we derive intelligence out of this stuff that's flowing around the internet that is generically called news? And that concept of news has incorporated blogs and video and tweets and Google alerts. It's almost anything that's possible that we wanted to focus as an intelligence source. Now, what we've done, and everyone will be thinking to themselves, is this just another kind of news aggregation where everything is being brought together? And the answer to that is no, because we can actually take basic news feeds from even aggregation services and then transform them into something special. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And one of those transformations that we do with news is what we're going to be talking about today with the industry graph. And that will be the topic of our presentation. I plan on doing this part of the presentation for 30 minutes and then allowing for questions thereafter. So if people are in a hurry today, and thank you if you are dedicating some time to this today, you can hear the presentation and then questions will happen after the bottom of the hour. And by the way, too, is our reach in terms of what News Patterns have been working with. We have been working with Fortune 50 type multinationals for many years. Why? Because they were some of the first organizations faced with figuring out the intelligence implications of changes in marketplaces and emergence of new ideas or potential threats based on all this stuff called news. And so we had to develop a whole new generation of discovery tools and discovery technologies to figure out what is going on in this rush of stuff that's called news, which, by the way, certainly includes Twitter today. And as a starting reference point is several years ago, the Wall Street Journal wrote an article in Google in the search for the future. And as a starting off point with that article, we have Eric Schmidt, was interviewed in this article. And I want to start out with what he said. That is a starting point here. But one of the ideas that is that more and more searches are done on your behalf without you needing to type, okay? This whole idea, Google, even several years ago, is saying, what do I need to know without me doing anything, i.e., even in this case, not even typing a search? And he went on to say, I actually think most people don't want Google to answer their questions, he elaborates. They want Google to tell them what they should be doing next. And this whole realm of what should a client, what should a user, what should someone engaged with this system be doing next is the topic of what we're going to be talking about with the industry graph. Now, when you think about what Eric Schmidt was saying years ago at Google, is look at where we are today with these different types of graphs. First of all, that innovation of what Google's doing about anticipating what a user might want to know is what Google's program is called the Knowledge Graph. It's a very active program. You don't see it overtly. It's all running in the background and anticipating what its connected users need to know without them asking to search for it. Right from the start, Facebook was developing its social graph, which is what is it I need to know based on my connections with community members, who I'm linked with, who I like, and that has been Facebook's development with the social graph. Google Yahoo more recently has been developed this thing called the interest graph, which again is another anticipatory type of technology to be linking users of Yahoo properties to say what is it they need to know based on who they are, what they've done in the past. And what we're going to talk about today is our innovation is industry graph, which is the same type of idea as knowledge, social, and interest graphs. But this is aimed at the idea of people that are in business making decisions or financial making decisions. What is it that I might need to know based on where I'm investing, where I'm working, or where I'm planning, to be a player in a marketplace? And that is the correlation of what industry graph is about. There are two really important components, to industry graph. One is the connection with the industry building block database system, which Alan Michaels was introduced, at the head of this presentation. And industry building blocks in Alan's organization basically has the most granular industry classification system that exists on the globe today. And the industry building block database is basically down to the granularity of 15,000 individual industries is now part of what the industry building block database is about. So that's probably an order of magnitude more granular than your typical classification system. And so we'll get into what makes this classification special in subsequent slides. The other component of the industry graph is the news patterns discovery, which is from my company, is this ability to identify trends, anticipate user interest, and prioritize what might be relevant or what might be worthy of someone's attention. I mean, the whole concept today is anyone can link up to a constant flow of news or constant flow of blogs or Twitter, and then be quickly overwhelmed because turning on that spigot is really a fire hose today. So what we have to do in terms of discovery is figure out what's relevant, how do we prioritize it, and how do we connect the dots amongst all this information so that we can turn that into relevant decision making. So let's start out with the first component of industry graph, which is the industry building block classification system. I did mention before that there's 15,000 granular industries that are part of this classification system. And what makes it special is the fact that the database of IBB is really based on this archetypical formulation that the relevant things around industries, around competition, are related to what Michael Porter developed in terms of these archetypes of competition. What's happening with competitors, how are competitors interacting with suppliers or buyers, potential entrants and substitutes, and all the interactions there between really define what is potentially relevant, where's the marketplace going, and how is it that I can start to anticipate and react to it by gathering all this type of information within this type of organization structure, and then look at interactions and changes and anticipations of what might the marketplace be doing to react to competition in the future. So this very fundamental idea of how competition works is automatically baked into the database system of industry building blocks. And also what's really powerful about this in our many years of experience of doing this, over 10 years for myself, and the same thing with industry building blocks, in those over a decade of experiences, we often find that clients themselves really don't have the best idea about how to classify all the different businesses and industries that they may be competing in, just because a greater sense of granularity is really important. So that's just on the competitor side, but let alone this idea of who's supplying at that granularity, who's buying at that granularity. All those other things are really important in driving, what is that I need to know. So what we're starting with industry graph is this idea. Let's start with the fundamental archetypes of competition, and then start to take that to enable clients and users of our network to understand their competitive situation. Now, the other component of industry graph is the news pattern algorithms for discovery. What we've done over the years is, before we even met the industry building block database, is we were developing mathematical relationships amongst buyers and suppliers, competitors, new entrants, all these fundamental things that the industry building block database was looking at, but we were developing mathematical relationships of determining what's relevant, what's emergent, what is a trend that might be worthy of attention, or what could be relevant. We were developing the mathematical relationships of those fundamental, Porter forces that we talked about before. And of course, adding in other things that might be relevant, like societal trends or governmental policies, those type of things. But we developed a mathematical system for looking for what's relevant and discovering in torrents of news or social media things that might be emergent that may not make it, to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, etc. We have been discovering or developing the mathematical constructs of how to discover these things, track them, and then give greater visibility of how a marketplace is evolving with our algorithms. So that's the core of industry graph. It's this combination of industry building block granularity database and the mathematical ability to discern what could be relevant, what's changing out of all that information that is defining these different industries, from a high level of granularity. So let's talk about three utilities that jump out of, which jump out of industry graph. Okay, there's three things we're going to talk about here really briefly. One is exploring, B, searching, and C, discovering. So these are the three parts I'll talk about that can be an application of industry graph, and of course, you'll be able to quickly see the strategic or financing implications of having this type of intelligence be developed by an industry graph type utility. Exploring. Well, exploring in our sense is that ability to wander around the greater network of these 15,000 granular industries and discover what competitors are there, what hierarchy of industry relationships are there, and this sense of this vast 15,000 industry database. We have the ability to wander around it and then look at the different companies and industries, competitors that are composing this in a very structured, very disciplined organizational system, developed by industry building blocks. So the first thing that starts out with, the sense of wandering around, the world economy, is the industry building block database is broken down into 19 industry sectors. Okay, and again, this is the world economy, and from there are subsectors, there's groups and subgroups, and we'll get into the sense of drilling down, but we have an organizational structure that says, okay, this is what the world economy is, and by this classification, what's related to what is in the same general industry vicinity, and this is the top layer that we're looking at. So the next thing we're going to look at, we're going to zoom in on this wedge of the global economy here, which is healthcare, life science, and pharmaceuticals. And this pie chart here actually represents the wedge that we were just looking at in the previous screen. So now you can see here is, okay, this healthcare subsector is further divided into medical equipment manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, animal health, et cetera. So we're at the next layer of organizational structure in this industry building block database. Oh, by the way, the next place we're going to go is, the medical equipment manufacturing. So the next slide I'm going to show you is now the subdivisions in detail, getting into medical equipment manufacturing. And so, again, the same type of organization, the same type of relationship, as we could further drill down further and further into this very intricate and very granular database, we're now going to look at medical equipment for body parts, etc. Okay, this is the wedge here that we're looking at, and is now represented by this slide. Okay, again, as we're drilling further and further, just think of how granular we're now getting, based on a very large worldwide economy, and now we're drilling further and further into the sense of medical, and now we're into medical equipment for body parts. And the next place we're going to go is heart-related products and equipment is now highlighted as part of this layer of the database. Now when we jump to this, again, this is the next step in this. This is the granularity of what heart-related medical products are. Okay, all these different industry definitions is now we're getting more and more granularity into this, and we are now going to jump into stents and heart stents and vascular stent manufacturing is the next industry of the furthest level of granularity that we're going to go to through the 4 or 5 steps that we just went through. And when I open this up, here are the competitors that are resident at that level of granularity, which is in stents and heart stents, et cetera, vascular stent manufacturing. Here are example competitive companies, and also by brand, which are at that very highly defined level of granularity within the database. And I need to say this is because it's really important to making industry graph work, is that there is no greater granularity in terms of the right context that exists in a database today about industry definitions than what you're looking at right here. And this is just the competitor part. Remember I said, the industry building block database gets into competitors, buyers, suppliers, new entrants. Well, we're only going to show here the competitor part of this level of granularity with stent manufacturing. But if we were to actually explode this and to look at all the different components, we'd not only be looking at competitors, but we'd be looking at industry vendors, industry substitutes, customer segments, customer channels. Again, these are lining up with the Porter forces of competition we started with earlier, but also getting into much more data about what's going on with that very granular industry. So, just think of the power of this as part of the industry graph, presentation, is that we can start with something as general as the worldwide economy, wander around it, looking at relationships, looking at the whole hierarchy of these industry classifications, getting down into the finest of refinement about what is an industry composed of, and it's not just competitors, but it's the things that you're looking at your screen here. And that's the type of detail that decision makers can really find great value in as part of utilizing industry graph. The next part of this is that, okay, that was wandering. Now let's talk about searching. Well, searching is the fact that says, all right, I want to be using the context of these very granular industries, and now I want to zero in on something and find out what might be relevant or find out what's interesting by zeroing in, because I'm just going to initiate a search. So let's initiate a search here as an example. In this case here, we're going to ask about Toyota. Now, Toyota obviously is a very large multinational. It's obviously in auto manufacturing. So our first step here is I want to find out about Toyota. The next question is okay, refining the search that the system replies back and says Toyota and what? Toyota in what industry as far as Toyota that it's participating in. And here's a sampling of the over 60 or so industries of where Toyota competes in terms of the different industry building block granularities where Toyota is a competitor. In this case here is we have a combination industry called transportation energy, which we'll get into in a moment. But again, going from a very simple idea of Toyota, the system is saying, okay, what level of granularity within industry graph context do you want to find out more about Toyota? The next screen is that now that we've chosen transportation energy industry, this is the type of information that is now embedded in Toyota as a context around transportation energy. So here are some of the competitors of Toyota, of course. Here are some of the suppliers into that competitive industry, that is about transportation energy, the big oil companies, for example. The substitute part is really the interesting part of transportation energy today, because this is where all the energy is being spent on. Is it going to be electric vehicles? Is it diesel? Is it biodiesel? Is it hydrogen? Is it natural gas? So you can start to see the complexity here of all these important decisions that are swirling around what is really important about this competitive context of transportation energy. And here are new entrants into the industry. Tesla, electric cars, who thought of them? Who would have thought a year ago that Google might actually be an entrant into transportation energy, making their own vehicles? Then the driverless, vehicle, initiatives that are going on. So these are the entrants in this competitive industry. And finally, the buyers, we'll get into that in a moment, but buyers tend to be the end consumer themselves, but we'll actually show you how the buyer shows up, even though we don't have general classifications of buyers showing up at this stage right here. So again, very general to more and more complex, more and more granularity around the topic here, which is Toyota and transportation energy. And by the way, each of these highlighted items are actually hyperlinks to getting further information. In this case, we're going to be talking about hyperlinking to further news information about them, which is current. So here are contextual search results in this regard, again about Toyota and transportation energy. In this case, these are queries that say, okay, tell me about Toyota and tell me about current news as aggregated from many credible, many really good sources of news out there, and prioritize them as regards Toyota in terms of transportation energy. And you're seeing here just a sampling of articles that would be hyperlinks going directly to those news sources that says, okay, here's something you need to know about Toyota if you really want to know Toyota as it competes in transportation energy. Here are example articles that have gone through those many filters and given you that context of knowing exactly what the context of competition is, in this case, transportation energy. But again, something we'll get into in a moment is it's more than Toyota itself. Remember back here at this slide, it's also information that may be about these topics that you didn't think about when you really said, tell me about Toyota, that you may be saying, I really need to know about hydrogen and transportation energy because it's there in a contextual way that I should be understanding if I really want to understand Toyota. And we'll show you how we're going to do that in a moment. So there's a clear example of taking the industry graph context and using it as a way of saying, I need to know about this company, Toyota, and then what context am I going to be understanding Toyota as it relates to its competitors, buyers, suppliers around transportation energy. Now let's go into the thing called discovery now. This is a third utility in terms of the industry graph type of utility to a user. And discovery is it's what is it? What are the news and trends? Discovery is a news and trend alerting that anticipates user interests. Remember getting back to the Google quote about delivering people information that they don't even think of asking for or don't even think of searching for. This is really the exciting innovation going on with internet information architectures. Is the whole part of discovery is having the system anticipate what I need to know without me asking for it, okay, without me taking any effort but to be alerted by it. And also, by the way, in doing it in such a way that I'm not being spammed by a flood of information that is not really relevant or not really interesting to me. So this whole idea of discovery, let's jump back again and say, okay, if we were discovering information about Toyota, again, in this case, we're still going to zero in on transportation energy. So here's Toyota, here's a discovery, it's about transportation energy. What do I get this time? Well, in this case here is, here are the contextual trend discoveries at this moment in time, which was a couple weeks ago in October. And what the system, in fact, October 6th, when we ran the discovery, in this case in Toyota, or actually the transportation energy industry in that very granular definition. And this is what the system said, the discovery system, that we should be looking at today on October 6th, or then. And what it says is check out hybrids, okay? Check out diesel, check out Toyota, check out methanol, check out Exxon, Mercedes, electric vehicles, and Tata. Now, this is obviously a very small subset of all the other possibilities that one might be checking out in terms of what's relevant or what might my attention be focused in on when we're looking at transportation energy. And so what this sense of trend discovery was doing for us in this system was taking thousands of articles a day about transportation energy, finding those topics, finding those connections that might be relevant, and then driving them to the top of the list for further inspection. In this case here, what are those forces that we talked about? Well, hybrids are a substitute, diesel is a substitute. Toyota, there's a current connection between hybrids and a substitute that's probably worthy of attention. And then there's a substitute of methanol. There's a supplier issue we might not check out about, Exxon. There's a competitor thing about Mercedes that's decreasing in relevancy. And there's new entrants that might be interesting. But again, the system is telling us, look at these, and giving us that sense of discovering something that we would not be able to sort through without the mathematical powerhouse that's enabling discovery to happen here. Again, Google, with its knowledge graph, is not light work. I mean, it's heavy lifting in the background to make knowledge graph work for Google. And likewise for us, there's a lot of heavy lifting and mathematical computation to deliver this sense of discovery of what a competitive industry should be, interesting, and bringing that to a level of attention so a user can take action on it. And we're going to actually show you something really cool in this in a minute. So this is what, in terms of the trends that we're finding in the discovery process. And again, by the way, some of these have nothing to do with asking for Toyota. Just the fact that it could have been interested in Toyota, it goes to the very granular industry and said, hey, you better check out Tata today, because this is what's going on in terms of something that is certainly related to Toyota. But guess what? There is no search term that says Toyota and. It was just about the granular industry that we're looking at. So here's some of the articles that were discovered based on the discovery that we were just looking at of trends. And again, you're looking at many of these articles that are coming from, the Washington Post or Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or MarketWatch, etc. And here we are looking at these exact articles, which again, if you were to click on them, you go directly to the Reuters website or the Washington Post, etc. that basically say, here's some of the relevant articles that we've culled through mathematically in these very granular industries, and now you can now inspect them to see what might be interesting in the actual text and articles themselves. Now, this is the third of, you know, exploring, searching, and now discovery. What we've done is we've even taken another step in terms of the textual display that you're seeing here in terms of prioritization of what you might be interested in. We've actually taken this to another level by animating the entire process of showing our clients and users how these interactions are playing out day by day, week by week, and hour by hour of what's going on in this news flow with social media, etc., about what you might be focusing your attention on. And what I'm going to show you right here is this is an animated version coming out of the News Patterning Network of what the transportation energy discovery system looks like. Again, talking about transportation energy in the sense that very granular, you know, industry that we talked about. And what you're seeing here in this display is the fact that these are the relevant topics that are swirling around this idea of transportation energy. Remember those forces that we talked about here? Here are those forces in terms of all the different articles that are being collected. And this visualization right now is starting to highlight the things that may be worthy of our attention. Again, what we were looking at in the previous slides, that was back on October 6th. And guess what? News changes day by day, hour by hour. What we're seeing here is actually the things that I might be wanting to look at today, again, highlighted mathematically first and then graphically second, to say what's driving this industry. And certainly efficiency is really important in the center of all this. Electric vehicles as they relate to diesel, gasoline, of course, as the major substitute out. And here's Toyota itself as an anchor topic. But the whole idea of this radar display here is to draw my attention to things that might be potentially interesting. In this case, you know, an acquisition of, you know, between two oil companies, I think. And now we can start looking at these graphical displays and starting to see what is going on right now, finding out what is happening in this very complex, very busy industry, again defined by the industry graph, that we can now graphically look at it and interact with it in a way that's drawing our attention to those things that might be worthy of further investigation, or at least a high-level understanding of how, in this case, the marketplace is evolving. I did say evolving because what this is, because news is changing everything, you know, day by day, is we can actually watch how these competitive topics are jostling for prominence, again, in the center of the radar space, which you're seeing here. And we're now playing a 14-day animation of how these topics are changing and morphing and moving amongst themselves in terms of what might be emergent, what might be relevant, what might be the central idea driving a marketplace. And that's what we're seeing here with the animations that are on display in this radar. So this is a very cool, very futuristic way of saying this is the fundamental of the industry graph. We're taking these fundamental competitive relationships, and what we're doing at this level is animating it to the point that we can now interact with it to the point of it's more and more going to be like a video game. So we can interact with these forces, interact with these trends, and understand what's going on in a way that's much more suited to our brain, which is looking at imagery, looking at interactions, and interacting with them to better understand instead of just trying to read line after line of text. That's what we're doing as a further enhancement of industry graph in terms of discovery. So getting back to finalizing at the bottom of the hour here is the key values of industry graph are the fact is, okay, we're enabling our clients and our participants, members, to explore the world's economy and find out all these granular relationships and industry definitions through exploring. We can also search the world economy through these very granular definitions, and by searching, not only find the components of these very granular industry definitions, but also what associated news and trends are coming out of that in real time that we can search for. And then searching as related to discovery, what can I discover that I don't even think of asking today that might be worthy of my attention because I'm a busy decision maker and I'm a busy financier? What is it that I might need to know that I'm not going to sort through a long list of text items, that I can see what's happening here and have the system alert me of it because it's a trusted intelligence component to my decision making, and that's the discovery part. And then again, it all gets back into is we all make better decisions if we have a superior context. Again, this whole idea of superior context for business and financial decision making gets us back where we started. Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and now news patterns and industry building blocks are all about superior in decision-making context. And our version of it is really focused in on financial and business, industrial decision-making or company competition decision-making. And the components that I talked about with industry building blocks and news patterns discovery enable industry graph to join the other graphs that are driving internet knowledge today that you'll see. So there it is. Thank you for your attention. And Eric, I open it up for questions.
Great, Jim. Thank you very much. Yeah, we do have a few questions in the queue. I'm going to go ahead and kind of work my way through them. But first, I wanted to ask Alan, do you have any other questions or remarks you want to modify or emphasize from what Jim had to say here, seeing as industry building blocks is one of the players here in this innovation?
Thank you, Eric. I just want to say the great delight in working with Jim over these past 3 years is, although industry building blocks to me is fascinating, it's exactly what Porter talks about, and it covers the whole global economy. It's very structured, so it's really 15,000 industry analysis to cover the global economy. But what Jim is able to do is the concept of you can have industry groups. You can combine any number of the 15,000 industries into whatever is of interest to the user, and Jim can and news patterns can make a radar out of it, so creating industry groups. That's all I have to say. I think it's great, and look forward to hearing other questions.
Thanks, Alan. Well, let's go with the first question in the door was from Greg. Greg asks, what are ways the industry graph can be used in contract negotiations with suppliers? Jim, if you muted yourself while you were doing that, you...
I'm muting myself? Sorry for that little connection there.
That's what I thought.
Okay, I'm live here. Yeah, in terms of contract negotiation type thing or with suppliers, it's you always are in a better negotiating position if you understand the greater industry context in terms of, is that supplier reacting to the future or new technologies that could be making them obsolete or making them too expensive to use, or maybe there's industry cost drivers that are happening that they should be responsive to. So I think in many cases, a lot of purchasing or acquisitions are really reliant on the supplier being the primary, information source. But I think there's always a huge negotiation advantage by actually knowing more about how an industry is evolving and whether that supplier is actually in sync, with all the competitive pressures, that they will be a future supplier keeping sync with, what you as an acquirer are going to need in the future.
I suppose there's also the factor of awareness of alternative suppliers. I think too often
yes.
most buyers find themselves looking at the big three, and there's often more like a small 20 kind of following those big three that may have a greater incentive to work within the terms of the buyer.
Thank you for the question. That's indeed a good application of what we're talking about.
So Paul has a question that actually, while he was delivering it, I asked him to come up with a follow-up question to that. And the original question was, does the industry graph cover the apparel value chain, textiles, fabrics, and garments? So I'll let you answer that before I come to his follow-up.
I'm going to have Alan do that because he is the expert in the database. Alan?
And the answer would be, sure, apparel is definitely part of the global economy, and there are many industries which make it up. So the answer is a yes, and any other question about any part of the economy, the answer would be yes as well. It is true we do discover new industries all the time, but we feel like we've covered a great portion of it, so we think we have it covered.
The follow-up that I sent back...
And I also have to add to what Alan just said, is that Alan has also surprised me, is that I was just adding in on that, Eric, is that even illegal industries are something that Alan is considering too.
Yeah, I think your point there, Jim, and you broke up a little bit.
Eric, are you there?
Yep, we can hear you. Sorry, I heard illegal industries was something Alan was considering, and carry on. You broke up for a second.
It's quite comprehensive.
Well, I can add, yeah, we do have about 60 illegal industries as well. So the basic philosophy is any industry that anyone tells us, we either have it in the database or we add it immediately. There's no such thing as an industry we know of that we just didn't add.
Great, great. So, Jim and Alan, I'll explain what I asked Paul to do. I thought because it was so specific to the apparel industry, it might be kind of fun if you actually plugged in a few keywords to your industry graph, engine or into the news patterns database. I don't know. Are you willing to do that? He sent me back a couple of keywords if you wanted to show how it might actually be programmed.
Yeah, we're not set up to do that today, Eric. But we'd enjoy the challenge with the follow-up in a separate conversation with your attendees. So we'd be happy to do that offline.
Sounds good. So Paul, we'll let you reach out to Jim on that to get those keywords actually run. Greg has another question. Can this run on a standard laptop, or does a group need a dedicated workstation for the IG database?
Our whole philosophy of this is software as a service. So we have the ability of just having even a tablet be talking to our servers and our network. So it's not intended to be a heavy network system that would be resident on a client's network, but actually you're talking to our network in a very light mode, even down to the point of smartphones and tablets.
All right, great. Now, folks, keep the questions coming in as you can. That's it from the audience right now. But I think the future for this, where do you see this headed, Jim, in terms of visualization? I think the visualization topic was one. I was in Rome last week at the SCIP meeting over there, and actually filled in for another speaker who couldn't be there, talking about visualization and ways in which you mentioned that are just more efficient in terms of decision making and decision support than reading being the sort of default. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It actually is one of my favorite topics, and it could be a whole different another session. But just think of it this way: is our evolution of visualizing these competitive environments. Really, what we found out is that creating histograms or creating bubble charts or trend lines. These are all mathematical constructs that might mathematically convey information if there's a sense of engagement or understanding what the principle is. But we as humans, our biggest challenge is to make an environment that is intuitive, so that almost any user can come up to it and say, I understand what the story is being told here. And stories are told over time, and time changes and time morphs, and so what you're seeing and what we're doing here is that sense of the right direction of really having a visualization is going to be more and more like a video game. That is where our brains are set up. Our brains perceive imagery and patterns at 10 million bits per second. We only read at 200 bits per second. Okay, 10 million versus 200. I'll take the 10 million any day. And so if we can be turning things more and more into a video game, animated, moving, having naturalistic, type behaviors of what a threat looks like or what an opportunity looks like, we can be conveying information so much faster than, developing more mathematical constructs of pie charts or histograms or whatever, because that's not how a human is designed to think. And I kind of one of the design principles that we always built into this is, would my dog, in looking at something, recognize what could be relevant? And the answer is yes, because it's moving or it's animated or it's changing in some way. And those are the things that our brains are cued in on, and that we are using to leverage that sense of awareness, in the visualization space that we're creating. And that's what you're seeing here with news patterns is very unique, because we knew we had to be suited to exciting a human's interest and curiosity about what's going on. Just in this case here is the sense of high animation between Petrobras and PetroChina is drawing my attention to it, okay? And it's just that sense of activity and motion is really what we're driving as a sense of what could be relevant in terms of further investigation. So that's where it's going in terms of visualizations from our point of view, Eric. And was there a second part of that question?
Well, now that I see the radar screen on the map or on your web browser there, would you mind drilling down into some of these topics and showing us what the actual result set looks like, or whatever sort of additional kind of detail you want to give on what you've currently got on the screen in front of you? As the audience has any other questions that want to come in, we don't want to end too early here. So if you have other things that you'd like to show here, please go ahead and give us a peek.
Oh, I did impute a potential follow-on to your previous question, Eric. In terms of use cases out there, is okay. For strategy and planners, it's obviously clear, that you can be taking industry graph and planning, strategic moves or strategic, opportunities. But just think about the whole thing of where we're going. And I've been actually spending quite a bit of time on Wall Street in terms of understanding a global marketplace, or investing opportunities about what do I need to be aware of in terms of finance or in terms of investing. So, or even we have variations of this that gets into political environments. So that this whole idea of where we're going, with industry graph and variants thereof, is really to be a greater sense of awareness in environments where there's overwhelming flows of news, social media, etc. And that's what we're really doing layer by layer. Animation by animation, of understanding these very interesting competitive situations, by looking at the relationships and looking at the priorities of those relationships. And that is certainly applicable for strategy and market awareness, but it gets into financial decision making as well as high level political decision making too. Following up with the suggested question of drilling down into what insights am I drawing, is what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to change the domain here, and instead of just finding articles that were applicable for the last week or the last day, I'm going to now ask for the last week, so I can see a little bit broader band of information that I might be looking at, which could be driving a trend or driving a relationship. And as our database as our radar is talking to our database right here, I'm going to ask to take a look at some certain relationships, what articles are in there based on what we've collected. Again, this is just in the public sphere of things. We've got private private networks running on for clients that they can only see privately with their own private sources of news, etc. But what you're seeing here is that I can say, oh, this is what's interesting here between fuel cells and Toyota, that line, and when I pull it up, you can see here quite a bit of news and information that is going on from the New York Times and USA Today about what's happening with this whole idea of fuel cells and Toyota. So here I am, I've got this trusted intelligence assistant, built on the foundation of industry graph. Now I can be poking around and looking at what could be interesting because the system is drawing my attention to it, in this case about Toyota and fuel cells, that I can get a very fast briefing about what's going on from broad sources of information, and I can be bringing that to my attention and making sure that I'm not missing anything because I'm seeing basically what's happening in all this competitive information. Likewise, too, I'm going to ask for, what we call the buzz layer of, what's going on in terms of many sources writing about something simultaneously. And obviously, there's a great deal of public interest out there about, car fires that Tesla may have had. And this is an example from the BBC in terms of Tesla, shares hit by record third fire. And if I just click on that, I should go to the BBC and see exactly what that piece of news was. So this is 68 different sources were about, this Tesla issue, and then we got the Petrobras issue, and so again, you can kind of see here a composite here of what people are writing about. Again, the same thing could be applicable for social media or Twitter. What we have this sense of, there is knowledge to be gained by the stuff we call news or the stuff we call social media. Yes, most people say most news is not really credible or nonsensical. That is true. but there are overarching trends that we distill out of all this that still give great insights just by knowing what a certain collective, in this case thousands and thousands of news writers, are writing about, so we can basically zero in on that and see the trends that they're basically portraying based on their interest in what they're writing about.
I have a question for you, Jim, about differentiating between that professional cadre of journalists and then more consumer-generated sources, people blogging and tweeting and sharing on Facebook and so on. My guess is that some percentage of those shares are probably pointing at journalistic sources. But how easy is it to differentiate between a more opinionated, maybe perhaps less fact-based blogger source versus more professionalized, quote unquote, rigorous journalistic ones?
Well, I think, Eric, you're asking a question that's really bigger than you realize, is where is the dividing line between opinion and journalism? And I think that's, some people would say the front page of many major newspapers is a lot of opinion. But what we find is, one, we can prioritize sources in terms of what has more weight within our network. But more interestingly than that, there's a self-selective process that we see, is that the more credible sources, even if they're from a single blog somewhere, could be very credible, that end up being interconnected in ways that drive their sense of being relevant, even though they may not have the circulation of the Wall Street Journal. In fact, what's interesting in the digital imagery, or the imagery business of medical, like MRIs and CAT scans and stuff, one of the most influential sources out there is called Aunt Minnie. Okay, so this Aunt Minnie blog is hugely, influential in imagery and medical, equipment businesses. But yet, no one would think about that as being so influential. But by nature and by usage and by connectivity, Aunt Minnie is very heavily weighted within our medical imagery radars that we create. And so it's all a matter of history and connectivity and practice that, these key sources that gain their relevancy, and the ones that are basically just fly by night and not really credible, they're not repeated, they're not referenced, and so they just kind of weed themselves out naturally in our ecosystem.
Marcia had a question related to filtering by time. Can you change the period of the animation to filter out relevance for only a short period, such as a single day with a high level of activity, that is simply a spike versus a prolonged high level of activity over a longer period of time?
Well, actually, thank you, Marcia, for the question. Is that the radar you're seeing here actually has that filter built in, because the underlying layer of topics and connections is really 4 weeks of data. But what you're seeing layered on top of that is the daily stuff, the weekly stuff, and the monthly stuff. So we found the best way of keeping our heads sane and developing a consistent context is to really have a rather stable relationship of how these topics move amongst themselves in a moving 28-day period. But the newest news is layered on top of that. And in fact, the newest news that is different is actually highlighted in yellow here today. So we've got the combination of both, some sense of stability and some sense of immediate variation, based on the time of the news. And in this case, I'm asking for today news, but like I did before, I can change this to be this week or this month and put different layers of news on top of the context of how these topics are related to each other. I'll pose a question if there's more questions coming in, but the radar is really an arena, my audience today. The radars are arenas of where the competing winning ideas win the center. And I'm going to pose a question here today. What do you think is in the middle of the U.S. politics radar today? What are the main combatants or ideas that are contesting the center of U.S. politics today? I mean, this is a question that isn't industry specific. It's just general knowledge. And so what the radar is going to tell us right now is the general sense of combatants at the center of, in this case, U.S. politics at this time is, guess what? It's President Obama versus the U.S. Congress. There it is. I mean, it's intuitively, it makes sense. A year ago, just past the election, it was, President Obama and Governor Romney was in the center. But right now, what you're seeing here is that these key ideas are fighting for a sense of prominence, and they're winning the center. And as you can see right now, President Obama is almost identical with the healthcare issue in terms of definition, in terms of the news. Okay, Congress is more connected with spending and shutdown at this time. And then we can watch things like economy or immigration or Arab Spring, which includes, Syria and, Egypt, etc. We can see these things all interacting and changing and morphing. And these are great insights for political campaigns, just like, industry graph is the same thing, for competitive decision making with businesses. Is that a little bit more insightful in terms of what is the radar trying to tell me by looking at the center versus, what's around the center?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what you've demonstrated here is that it's a very fast tool for gaining a quick sense of understanding of new topic areas. And so it strikes me that, in particular for people like investors, particularly the individual investor who, struggles, I think, against the more scientific, high-frequency trading algorithms that just look for patterns in trading volume. Someone who's really, truly investing along with the news and event flow. It strikes me that if you don't know the industry that a particular investment target is competing in, you can get a pretty quick understanding of their relative position and prospects if you want to be a medium to long-term investor and buy in and go long.
Yeah, in fact, that's an excellent point here, is that we noticed years ago that Nokia became relatively irrelevant versus other smart manufacturers. The radars and patterns already figured that out, but it became irrelevant in an iPhone. Is the stock price of Nokia dropped 50% within 2 or 3 days. And it was all sense that in a relatively short time it became irrelevant associated with new apps, new competitors, relevant as people were looking for smartphones. This certainly is a good
Hey, Jim, I got to jump in real quick because we're getting a lot of garble on your line there. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. I was hoping it would clear up on its own. Can you mute yourself and then unmute real quick and see if we can get rid of the garbly stuff on your line?
Can you hear me now?
It's a little better. Yep. I think it might be an internet issue. Usually when audio starts to flap, it's internet. But we missed most of that, I'm afraid. I heard the word Nokia in there, and then most of that was a little chewed up.
What I was saying is our radars. Can you hear me now, Eric? Okay.
Much better.
Eric? Is that we noticed 5 months before the stock market did that Nokia was irrelevant, and when the stock market figured it out, Nokia lost 50% of its stock price within a couple of weeks.
That was great. Thank you for reiterating that, because
likewise with candidates.
Oh, right. I suppose.
Likewise with candidates. If a candidate is irrelevant, then there's a good chance they're not going to be elected too. So that's what you're seeing. Or if your product or company is relatively irrelevant, there's a good chance that correlates to market share in terms of what your product is selling.
That's a really interesting application for this technology, is to sort of how easy is it to kind of backcast, so to speak, go back and look at prior market conditions and then try and isolate the factors that someone used to succeed or hit it big versus what other players in a market may have failed to do, and as a result, ended up where Nokia was in your observation.
Well, the good news is that because we're capturing this data day by day, is that we have a sense of history built into it. And so this is the tablet radar, for example. This is about tablets as iPad competes with Android, et cetera. Is we can go back in time, Eric, and actually look at what the radars looked like in different points in history. So we can be recreating history here to say, okay, what was going on here? And by the way, what was the news at that time? Who were the players? Was any of them emergent at the time? And can we basically look at how the marketplace played itself out? Again, people are writing news, ladies and gentlemen, based on their observation of how a marketplace is playing out, and maybe even handicapping who they think the winners and losers are going to be. And so we can be recreating history by looking at the radars over time to see what's been changing, what's emergent, and whether someone is a new disruptor or a new substitute. We can see them actually emerge and watch their progress. And that's something we do all the time. In this case here, just closing off on this, is the tablet radar. The tablet industry is really defined by the competition between Android devices and iPad devices. Completely intuitive. What you may not know is the main application driving this sense of competition at this time is multimedia, which is MMS you're seeing here. And the business app is a key linkage point with whether Microsoft can actually become disruptive in the center here with its Surface tablet. It's probably going to be through the path of business, as you see the business app laying here in between the center, the market leaders, which are Android and iPad. This is the path for Microsoft to potentially, threaten the center of the radar, is through the business app.
Now, what would be really interesting, Jim, is to see this, if this is current news, flow, and then compare this with about 9 months ago, sort of pre-Windows 8, Microsoft Surface as an application example, and sort of see how much closer Microsoft and Windows has moved to the center. My guess is they were way out on the periphery, if they even showed up at all. Just to see how they're vectoring. What does the vector look like in terms of the coverage?
Well, you asked that question. We actually wrote a blog about this not too long ago, and I'll see if I can't expand this. This blog here is actually showing the track of the Microsoft Surface when it was introduced through August of this year. And it made this track here becoming this close to being really a disruptor of the center. But then its track took it, back out again as the marketplace did not quite accept, the Surface RT and other versions of it. You can see that track right here in terms of just how close did it get, and then what happened in terms of the marketplace's reaction to it.
Wow, that's neat.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that's really cool. But how hard is it to do that comparison? Is this really an overlay of, you'd take multiple snapshots of the same, news space and then sort of start to overlay that particular topic? Or how did you build that?
Well, what we did is we went back to our utility in the radar where we have the ability to look at the different times, Eric, that we want to look at. So we basically took these time points and added them up, week by week or month by month, based on the fact that we can be replotting, the different time domains and looking at how something may have changed or where it was in time. And so what you're seeing there is a compilation of all these historical data points that we had.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, we're down to about 2 minutes remaining here, and any final points you want to make, Jim or Alan, as we wrap this up? And I'll give a quick plug, by the way, for our December Advanced Strategy and Marketing webinar. I've got a gentleman by the name of Bruce Rosenstein who just wrote a book about Peter Drucker. He's a Drucker historian, and he has some very interesting updates on what Drucker thought about topics like innovation and operational efficiency and other things, sort of compiled as contributions from people who knew him. So he's going to be our guest coming up in December. And then in January, we have another fellow from a product design company who's going to be talking about predicting net present value of future product introductions, which I think should be a lot of fun. I'll be posting links to those registration forms up on the industry segmentation LinkedIn group, as well as our own blog here in the next couple of days, once I get the dates for those nailed down. But Jim and Alan, anything you want to leave the audience with here today?
I just want to say thank you, Jim.
Go ahead, Al.
Okay, I want to thank you, Eric, for hosting this. Jim, fabulous presentation on the industry graph. Thank everybody for attending, and also industry subgroups. We hope you join them, because next year we're going to start webinars for those subgroups as well. Thank you, Eric.
And likewise, thank you, audience, and Eric, for organizing this. again, is we're really talking about a big fundamental idea here in terms of industry graph joining knowledge graph and social graph, et cetera. Decision-making context is the future of information architecture today, and you are looking at it right now as that advancement of knowing the context of making a decision is really what we're doing in line with all those other famous graphs that are out there today.
Wonderful. Well, very insightful, guys, and thanks again, Jim, for putting this together. I really appreciate it. On behalf of the audience, thank you very much. And audience, whether you're here in person or are getting this as a recording, we have recorded the session. I have a PDF of Jim's slides available. We'll be putting the recording up as a private link on YouTube and sending that around in the next couple of hours in follow-up email. And join us again next time. We'll be back in December and again in January with a couple of other exciting topics that we hope you can participate in. Have a great rest of the week, everybody, and a wonderful weekend ahead. Cheers.